Woo! Good evening, QCF. My name is Myles Markham. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. And I am absolutely delighted to be both here in Albuquerque, in person, but also with everybody who's joining us virtually, wherever you may be. Like that bio that was considerably longer than I remember writing said, I am Native Hawaiian. I'm Japanese, Swedish, Norwegian, German, American. I am queer. I am transgender. I am transmasculine and non-binary. And I grew up as an evangelical, born-again Christian in the Deep South. Despite the stereotypes that are associated with growing up this way and in that region, not all of it was bad. I'm not going to say it was great either. In fact, I moved to Los Angeles 3 years ago because I wanted to mess around and see what it was like to be protected from discrimination and to have health care and rights. And so far, it's going well for me. This is my 6th QCF conference in person, and my 9th overall. I joined this community 10 years ago, just 2 years after leaving so-called conversion therapy, and 9 months after becoming fully affirming of myself and the countless other LGBTQ Christians across the world. So to be here right now on this stage and given the power that has been vested in me by this itty-bitty, teeny-tiny Britney Spears microphone, I feel 2 things. On one hand, tremendous gratitude for QCF. On the other hand, I feel like a very old, very gay antique. I am only 33. But look, a lot has happened in that time. It has been a long and wide 33 years. And in this one particular instance, size does matter. Anyways, what are we doing here? What am I doing? Oh, wait, back. What am I doing here? I'm going to talk to you all tonight about queer friendship. And queer friendship not just as a noun, but as a verb, as a spiritual practice, and as a material and embodied expression of God's presence in our daily lives. But first, a quick housekeeping note about what this is not. I am not a pastor. This is not a sermon. And this is not a theological treatise. Instead, think of this more like a TED Talk. I'm going to tell you a few stories about a few people who I met because of the Q Christian Network. And I want to share these because in the whole grand scheme of healing justice and what it looks like to build a lifelong network of care for ourselves, there's nothing I've found more liberative, more loving or renewing than intentional queer friendship. So, for my first act, I'm going to take you back to May of 2015. I had been working for a national LGBTQ organization for about 6 months, and like the chronic people pleaser I was, I had volunteered to manage the general contact at reformationproject.org for our organization. Like anybody who manages the contact address for their organization, I received dozens of emails and in our case, very desperate ones. People who were LGBTQ or our family members who were aching to heal this chasm they felt between their faith and their LGBTQ identity and orientation. There were many rewarding parts of that role for me, but this job very quickly created a profound imbalance in most of my relationships I formed there. I was usually caretaking in a one-sided and over-functioning sort of way. I was 24 and didn't know how to set boundaries, ask for what I needed, or set terms of healthy and loving dynamics with the people I was meeting through my job. And this, in a word, was exhausting. So one day, I received one of these help request emails from an ex-gay, someone who said they used to be gay, but then came back around to realizing they're still very gay. This person was just a few weeks out of a serious relationship with a cishet woman they were supposed to propose to, and this person was at that time living in a house full of conservative and charismatic short-term missionaries in Gainesville, Georgia. So yeah, I was under the impression this would be another one-sided relationship, and for the first couple months of our connection, that dynamic was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I see the slide on the screen here, but I don't see. There it is. Here is a photo from that time. Now, you don't need to feel secondhand gender dysphoria for me, because I don't feel it firsthand for myself. I was cute then, and I'm cute now. I also don't have a problem with the caption, which says so much about us and where we, and especially Kevin, the author of this post, was during that time. The caption reads, "It was so freaking good spending time with this incredible sister and woman of God. So glad that we get to do life together. So encouraged by her passion for the church and his plan for her life. ... Future pastor, #family, #TRP and ATL, #Georgia Peaches, #brother sister kinda love, #everyone jelly, #hey haters." But not too long after this Instagram post, the dynamic Kevin and I had slowly began to shift away from the pastor and the pastored sort of thing. Among many changes, Kevin left non-affirming faith communities, came out, found job and housing security, stopped using male pronouns for God, stopped using Christianese hashtags. And eventually, we discovered together that they're actually my sister and I'm their brother. But bigger than these changes, Kevin became one of the first friends I ever had who showed me that I could tell them the truth and they would be able to handle it. What I mean by this is that while I didn't have theological issues at that point with being a queer or trans Christian, I didn't have issues with feeling enough as a mixed race person. I didn't have any of the hang-ups that had guided so much of my life around identity at that point. But I still lived with so much fear of being honest in really small ways with people I cared about. Being honest in a day-to-day kind of way about my likes, dislikes, needs, and wants, those things were impossible for me to share with someone. I was pathologically averse to hurting people's feelings, inconveniencing others, asking for help, taking up too much space, and especially letting someone know when they did something that hurt me. But Kevin interrupted that pattern and made it safe for me to stop apologizing for my life. They showed me over time and space that we can't ever really be seen by others if we don't show them ourselves. And if we don't show ourselves, we can't ever be loved. Over the years, Kevin crystallized for me the things I want most in my friendships: balance, reciprocity, mutual caregiving. And I learned that these things were only going to be possible for us if I told Kevin, for example, when I felt like they were interrupting me or talking over me, or that I didn't actually enjoy coming over just to listen to operatic choral music performed in Latin for 2 hours. Kevin invited me to be direct and to be clear in my communication. They essentially coached me into having emotional integrity with them. This was terrifying for me, but they lowered the stakes and made it possible because when I would speak up, they responded with empathy, with curiosity. They asked me questions to understand where I was coming from, and they didn't get defensive or withdraw. In conflict, they became more present, more attuned to my feelings, and through this, we learned to trust each other. Because of this, I've never been afraid to disagree or to have conflict with Kevin. And that alone unlocked a layer of intimacy and friendship I didn't know I'd been missing my entire life. Queer friendship with Kevin has been liberatory for me because it's the vehicle that exposed my tendency toward people-pleasing in friendships and helped me to transition to people-loving instead. While Kevin and my respective identities, past traumas, taste in drag queens, and personality diagrams do have a lot of overlap, our differences are all the more plentiful. But the kind of rapport we've built together means that the differences we have are never an occasion for estrangement, and they don't alarm us. In fact, our differences are what ground our intimacy. Queer friendship is a site of liberation because it acknowledges the reality of the fluidity in our personhood and relational dynamics. It allows us to evolve alongside each other and to show and tell our true selves. Queer friendship is a site of liberation because it allows us to move from self-abandonment-based to self-love-based connections, which leads me to my second act, queer friendship as true love. The year was 2017, and I'd wandered into one of QCF's BIPOC luncheon affinity spaces, and I can't totally recall how I got directed to the small talking circle that I wound up in, but standing across from me in that little circle was another queer Asian I had not met at any of the previous QCF gatherings. They shared about themselves and their faith in a way I found extremely compelling and resonated with me. We were both theology nerds, interested in anthropology, our ancestral lineages, and our indigeneity. We had both dabbled in research on vocational celibacy and intentional Protestant communes for a beat. We had had similar challenges and triumphs when it came to becoming affirming. And we were both experiencing our genders as mysteries and surprises, even to us. And we also both grew up being very good at softball. What I'm saying is there was an immediate connection. Platonic sparks flew all weekend. And some of my friends at the conference even asked me if I might have a crush on Kai. Now, like many a queer that came before us, I did need to take some time to examine the contours of the pull I felt toward Kai. This is an exploration some have called the do you, be you conundrum. That is asking oneself as a queer person, do I want to do you, or do I want to be you? For me and for Kai, the answer to this was a platonic affection. But that didn't make it any less exciting, any less interesting, or any less enlivening for both of us. Over the years, despite hundreds and then thousands of miles between us, Kai and I would find ways to stay connected and to have fun. We'd meet up in random cities for this very conference, other progressive Christian gatherings, Asian feminist academic conferences, and many things in between. The liberation I had found in my friendship with Kevin was something I was able to apply to friendship with Kai and expand on. Very early, we were able to be vulnerable with each other, to disagree, to confront one another about times we felt upset or hurt, and we were always able to repair. I was reminded through them that often in the first place, many of us who grow up queer and trans in a difficult environment are ever going to experience a truly safe, healthy, and secure attachment is not going to be with a lover. It's going to be with a friend. Time and time again, Kai has demonstrated that to love someone, sure, might start with some kind of spark, an electric moment, a flash feeling of affection or affinity. But love doesn't really become until that energy is made into a consistent set of actions. A way of being is created that says to someone, I'm in your corner, I'm on your team, and I'm here to nurture your growth, your expansion, your ability to become yourself. To really carry this point home about queer friendship as true love, I want to tell one specific story about Kai. A story that I call my favorite thing that happened in 2023. It was June, and I was headed to Massachusetts for a bachelorette weekend, and then right after I was going to North Florida to be with my family. Toward the end of the previous year, I had begun a relationship with a polyamorous person, and in the interest of my sexual health, I started taking PrEP, a drug that, if you're not familiar, is proven to reduce the risk of getting HIV by 99%. While PrEP is free, it does have to be prescribed and ordered through a pharmacy. And do you want to know who didn't check if they were due for a refill the Friday night before their 10-day trip? Me. This was a problem because PrEP is taken daily, and if you miss more than 2 doses, then for trans masks, AFAB non-binary people, and cis women, it takes 30 days to get back into our systems at full efficacy. Which is to say that it was important for me to find Truvada stat. I reached out to queer friends in LA, to queer friends in Boston, and to queer friends in Florida to no avail. I tried to reach my doctor to see if she could send an emergency refill to a pharmacy in Boston. I sent DMs to LGBTQ orgs across New England. And just when I felt I was running out of options, another queer friend in Detroit, who had a queer friend in Boston, told them to tell me to make a Grindr profile. And when I got to Boston, just to start messaging guys asking for PrEP. They told me they'd done this before and it worked out for them, and that I would easily find a nice gentleman who would give me drugs out of the goodness of his gay heart and ask for nothing in return. That may have been possible, but as a trans man who spent almost 3 decades successfully avoiding the male gaze, this was not the path for me. So I called Kai, who sent out the gay bat signal to all of queer academia across the region, and they found Descovy, which is another brand of PrEP, but they could not find Truvada. Just before all hope was lost, though, a friend of a friend's partner came up with the treasure I was seeking. Truvada was found, but it was all the way in New Haven, Connecticut with Kai. And I was flying to Boston, 136 miles away from them. Even if we overnight shipped the drugs, it was the weekend, and they wouldn't make it to me in time. So, Kai did the only completely unreasonable, good, right, true, and frankly lesbian thing you could do in that moment, and that was to change all of their plans for the day to take a 3-hour train from Connecticut to Massachusetts, meet up with me at a random brunch restaurant, accidentally show up wearing the same backpack fanny pack combo, give me gay drugs, return previously borrowed clothes, and then take the train 3 hours back home to Yale. And this, my friends, is my long way of making this point. Biblical and theological arguments may help bring you peace of mind about God's affirmation of LGBTQ identity and relationships. But they will never take a lift, a 3-hour train, and then a walk around Boston to bring you an emergency supply of pre-exposure prophylaxis and a cashmere sweater they borrowed 6 months prior. That's right. Only the true love of queer friendship will do that. I know I told you this is not a sermon, but I do want you to say amen to that. And now, for my last magic trick, I present to you a note on queer friendship as renewal. This one is, however, a story about a queer friendship with a friend who is not queer, and I can almost promise that I will make that make sense by the end of this. This story begins even further back than those other two, in 2013. I had moved to Topeka, Kansas to start a job with a very loud public LGBTQ advocacy campaign. Shortly after graduating Bible college, being kicked out of my church, kicked out of my house, and mostly estranged from my family on account of becoming theologically affirming. This was the summer Exodus International, the then largest quote-unquote ex-LGBTQ organization in the world, hosted its final conference. A conference where, because of stories like Linda's and her family's, Exodus International formally apologized for the damage they had done over 3 decades. They owned the difference between their intent and their impact, admitted that they had offered thousands of us false hope, and all of this culminated in making the life-saving decision to shutter their doors and end the organization once and for all. I was not at that last Exodus conference, but I did hear about it, and because of my own former involvement in that community, through a mutual friend, I was shortly after introduced to Linda. And so began our first months of phone calls, text messages, Facebook messages, and because I am a man with a forever sapphic-shaped heart, Linda and I also exchanged handwritten letters and drawings. Before I had a Kai, before I had a Kevin, I had a Linda. Linda is someone with whom I had immediate ease, comfort, safety. Our friendship provided for me stability over that summer amidst a very turbulent time. Like too many of us here, I had lost everything: my job, my church, my family, my community, my trust in evangelical theology and practice. The list goes on. But in losing those things, I found so many others. And one of the things I found was what it was like to be in a friendship with a person who so palpably lived out the gospel of Jesus and affirmed LGBTQ identities in their fullness. It was because of Linda's faith, and not in spite of it, that she could bear witness to my pain, my grief, my broken heart, and offer something brand new to me from a Christian. And that was a non-anxious presence of wholehearted acceptance and complete affirmation of who I was. I finally got to meet Linda in person at my very first QCF conference in January of 2014 in Chicago, just mere moments after the city had experienced a record-setting polar vortex. This is the first photo ever taken of us. And I know a few other folks who got thrown into that picture are here this weekend. So shout out to you 10 years ago as well. I mentioned the cold of Chicago, though, because I hate the cold. And despite how much colorful language left my mouth that weekend because of the ghastly tundra we were in, my heart had never felt warmer. I remember a specific moment sitting in Linda's room with her family and a couple other friends and exhaling. I started to experience a glimpse of what it could look like Bacola mentioned, to come home to myself. And from there, to come home to safe people, and through those, to finally come home to God. I mentioned at the top of this story that Linda isn't queer. I did check with Linda as recently as 2 days ago, and she feels comfortable being publicly identified as an openly heterosexual person. So I'm only outing her as a straight consensually. Thank you. But my friendship with Linda is queer because Linda isn't exactly my peer, nor is she a parent to me. And these are the two options society usually configures for friends across generations. We're different by way of race, gender, class, sexual orientation, and marital status. But our shared lack of concern for the normative ideas of who can be friends and who should be friends has created a dynamic that I don't have any other word for than queer. It has been said, after all, that queer is an umbrella term. And to me, if our relationship transcends the state-sanctioned ways that people connect, develop affinities, grow in love, and become family to each other, then I think what we have is pretty damn queer. Emphasis on the pretty part of that. Queer friendship, when pursued in a way that communicates the priority and value of platonic connections, transforms us. Deliberate queer friendship makes people new. In fact, I'm convinced that queer friendship is actually one of the highest and most salient ways we ever get to live out our resurrection experiences as LGBTQ Christians and allies. Because I didn't have another transitional statement, you can also say amen again. Amen. As some of you have may seen in our QCF conference app, or heard again in my way too long bio, I work for an organization called Trans Lifeline. Trans Lifeline operates the only national peer support crisis hotline where every operator our callers connect with is a trans or non-binary person themselves. We are proudly a for us, by us organization, and we will stay that way until our services are no longer needed. Something TL has discovered in its 10 years of operation is that of all the ways in which trans folks experience systemic, institutional, and interpersonal oppression, the primary driver to our hotline is not poverty, housing insecurity, job insecurity, daily harassment, or microaggressions. The primary driver to our crisis hotline is not religious trauma or intimate partner violence. No, the primary driver to our hotline and most crisis hotlines around the globe is something else. And that something else is isolation. The overwhelming and suffocating feeling that comes when you believe that even when surrounded by people, you're still utterly alone in this world. This is such a tremendous problem in our society that last year, the US Surgeon General actually released a report called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. The report included countless adverse health effects that are directly tied to loneliness and isolation. We're talking brain disease, heart disease, blood disease, autoimmune disorders. The list goes on. The report notes that in a time of rapid change, technology, and tools to create connection, Americans report on average being more lonely than before. So what do social scientists posit is the reason for this? Well, the number of connections many individuals have are not what is scarce here, but rather it's the absence of quality in those connections, and furthermore, the absence of time spent in person with those connections. So, you wonder, how do we change this? How do we build cultures of connection from community to community? Well, by this point, it might come as no surprise that my answer to this question is that those of us here spark, build, and nourish intentional friendship. This means creating shared rituals, taking annual trips, inventing holidays to celebrate together, driving and picking each other up from the airport, and going out of your way to spend time together. It means sharing small intimacies, things like grocery shopping, going on walks, playing video games, FaceTiming someone just to tell them a funny story that happened to you that day. It also means sharing large intimacies, being able to care for each other in illness, after surgery, during breakups, and through the loss of loved ones. It means inviting each other to be your plus ones to events, to family-centric holidays. It means introducing each other to people you care about. We create cultures of connection when we come to a conference like this on purpose to fall in or deepen existing love, not necessarily with a boo thing, but with friends. I've now reached my time, and so I want to thank you all for coming to my gay TED Talk. And if you liked this or you hated it, I want you to come to a live discussion about it on Saturday with Kevin Garcia and Matthias Roberts on the podcast stage. That's all I have. Thank you again. Have a wonderful conference, and make some friends.